I've been working out for nearly 4 years now, and I can safely say that I've built a pretty aesthetic physique. And of course, it's nowhere near perfect or anything, but I think I've made significant progress. But haven't you noticed that you might look at some physiques online, on influencers, on bodybuilders, and all types of people who go to the gym? And there's certain people who you might say are more jacked than the other, but they actually look kind of worse. They look kind of strange, right? You respect them for, going to the gym and getting so jacked, right? But their physique is nowhere near as attractive as some of these other guys who they don't even have that much muscle, right? Now, this is the aesthetic physique. An aesthetic physique really comes down to these three things. It comes down to symmetry, your FFMI, and your leanness, okay? And this is exactly what I'm going to be talking about in this video is what actually is the aesthetic physique, because you've seen physiques all over online, and their physiques, you might not know at first glance what makes their physique just look better than the other guy, even though he might have more muscle and he's more jacked and everything. But their physiques, they actually look better. And I might show some pictures up on here on screen of in my opinion, very aesthetic physiques. And notice the certain traits in their physique which actually make them as good as they are. And that is exactly what I'm going to be talking about in this video. So I hope you give it your full attention, and I promise you that you will go ahead and learn something in this video. Now, the first thing is symmetry. And nobody really talks about symmetry anymore. But if you go ahead and go back to the golden era of bodybuilding, the bodybuilders of that era, they were actually focusing on symmetry, specifically a bodybuilder called Frank Zane. And just by looking at his physique, you might think, he's not as big as those other guys that might be, the bodybuilders of today, but his physique just looks really well proportioned, and it looks very nice to view his physique with your own eyes, right? Because there's no overpowering muscles that you might get from the average sort of training split of today. Because so many gym goers, for example, they want a big chest, right? They want to have big arms, they want to have big legs. And, if you go ahead and hammer certain muscle groups too much and you sort of overtrain them and they become too big, it really throws off your symmetry in your physique and you don't look as good as some of these other guys, right? Because you might be looking at some people and they might not be as big as those other guys, but they have symmetry. And symmetry really is what makes an aesthetic and attractive physique. So, what is symmetry? Symmetry is basically having a well balanced physique. And what really makes your physique really look as good as it is your foundation. And your foundation of your physique, for men, it is the V taper look, not the modern day X frame, but it is the V taper. And the V taper is consisted of these two muscle groups. What really makes your physique look good? It is the shoulders and it is the back, specifically the lats. And all the other muscle groups, like the chest, the arms, I don't know, the forearms, the legs, they're really just icing on the cake to your physique. And if you go ahead and focus on building that foundation up, building that solid foundation for your physique by focusing on your shoulders and your back, that really is going to go ahead and make your physique look that much better. When I first started out in the gym as well, I was really just not even focusing on the shoulders as much as, like, for example, my chest. I was really going ahead and hammering push ups, for example. But, push ups and the most pressing movements, yeah, they might train the pectoral muscles and they might train some of the front delt as well. But the front delt, it is hit so much with modern day exercises, like people are doing bench presses, they're doing machine presses, you know, it's not actually training that much of the other parts of the shoulder, which could actually be way more important, such as the side delt and the rear delt, okay? And most exercises, they don't really hit the side delt as much as, for example, a lateral raise, because a lateral raise, it is pretty much the only exercise which isolates the lateral head. And if you want to have an aesthetic physique, you really got to focus on the lateral head of the delt, and that is going to make your physique that much better. So The muscle groups I would say to go ahead and prioritize are the shoulders, specifically the side delt and the rear delt, and then I'd say the lats, and then I'll say the upper chest, and then I'll say abs, and I'll say neck and well proportioned traps, your arms, and then your legs, for example. That is, in my opinion, the correct order to go ahead and train your muscle groups. And the thing is that, for example, with like the lats or the shoulders, I don't really think you can go ahead and easily overtrain these muscle groups. And if you, for example, have very big shoulders and other muscle groups aren't as big, it's not really gonna throw off your physique that much than if you had, for example, massive arms, right? And a big lower chest, for example, that's gonna really throw off your whole symmetry. And really, what it is about an aesthetic physique is that having your whole physique balanced, right? There's no particular muscle group that is super big and others are not as good. So the same thing goes with your legs as well. You shouldn't be having skinny legs, right? But you also shouldn't have massive sort of legs, which also can throw off your physique and make you also have an X frame, which isn't actually as attractive as the V taper that the golden era guys were actually going after. So really, you should be training each muscle group pretty much the same. And you should be looking at your own physique and thinking, okay, what do I need to work on myself? And then you can go ahead and structure a proper program and actually start hitting the muscle groups which you need. All right, the second thing, it is your FFMI. And FFMI means your fat-free mass index. And basically what that is that, some physiques, the physiques of today, they're actually kind of too big to even be attractive anymore. And the modern day bodybuilders, for example, they're actually on a ton of steroids and they're actually super massive, okay? I'm talking like 280 pounds lean, okay? And nobody, especially girls, they don't actually find that sort of look attractive, okay? We as men, we can go ahead and understand that it takes a lot of hard work, even on steroids. If not on steroids, it takes so much time. It takes good genetics to go ahead and get this massive, right? But if you want to look attractive, if you want to have an aesthetic physique, then most definitely you should be going to the gym. You should be training hard and focusing on building muscle. But there comes a certain point where, especially if you go on gear, you're going to look too big to even be attractive anymore. And I'll say that on average, I would say that for men, if their FFMI is anywhere from like 21 to 23, I'll say that they're in the perfect zone of actually being as good as they can for their frame, okay? So basically your FFMI, I would say, if you don't want to go ahead and go online and do the test, and you'll basically, if you go to the test, it will ask your height, your weight, and your body fat percentage, right? But I would say that the perfect sort of physique for most people, it is actually when you have trained for roughly as a natural from like 2 to 6 years, where you have maxed out your newbie gains, you've built solid amount of muscle, you've built like 20 pounds of muscle on your frame, then you'll be pretty much as good as you can. You don't want to be skinny, but you also don't want to be this huge open division bodybuilder, right? You don't want to be Ronnie Coleman, okay? Because that really isn't attractive. And if you really want to go ahead and focus on aesthetics and attractiveness, you need to be building muscle, but you need to be building muscle cautiously. All right, and the third thing which makes your physique aesthetic, it is actually how lean you are. And no, I'm not gonna go ahead and tell you to go ahead and get shredded below 8% body fat and be this all year round.
So at the end of the day, bro, you gotta listen to this. If you're a fucking shredded sick cunt, you can get away with anything, bro. If you can find some fat cunt making this shit, people will be like, oh yeah, it's this, bro, yeah. No one gives a fuck, man. In life, if you want to be noticed, you gotta be a fucking ripped cunt, you gotta be a shredded cunt, you gotta go to the gym, you gotta be a sick cunt, you gotta fuck bitches, you gotta not give a fuck. Because that's what we do, bro. That's what the zyzz cunts do. That's what the revolution is, bro. None of these fucking sad cunts. We're all gonna fucking make it, bro. That's it.
Even if you are overweight, I would still tell you not to go ahead and make such a huge calorie deficit and become shredded. And what am I talking about leanness, okay? I'm talking about, let's say that you've been training hard, and for most people, I would say that you need to be bulking, right? You need to be in a calorie surplus and actually focusing on building muscle. Once you've been bulking for months and you've done bulks and cuts and bulks and cuts, and if you go ahead and get to that sort of point where you go ahead and you've built pretty solid amount of muscle, then you can go ahead and lean down and then basically main gain from then on then. And I'll say that the perfect leanness, the perfect amount of body fat percentage for most people, I'll say it's anywhere from 12 to 16, 17%. And I'll say that is pretty much as aesthetic as you can be, because it's not going to go ahead and spike your cortisol and crash your testosterone, right? But it's also going to give you that six pack, which you'll be walking around with, and your muscles will be more defined. And in this sort of body fat percentage, you'll be looking pretty good and pretty aesthetic without needing to go ahead and get shredded. But I must first say that if you are new to the gym, and even if you are not completely overweight, I would say that for most people, you need to be going ahead and doing a lean bulk. Everyone should be pretty much lean bulking as long as you are not overweight, especially if you're just starting out in the gym, because you do not need to be going ahead and trying to get a six pack right now. Because really, all the physiques that you might be seeing online, all these guys who are shredded and they look super good, they build their physiques not by going ahead and getting shredded and then just they magically build so much muscle. It is because they went ahead and did a bulking phase, okay? Nobody wants to hear this. But first, you need to go ahead and gain a little bit of body fat. You need to be eating more calories. You need to be getting in more meals, training hard. This is how you go ahead and get that sort of physique. This is how you build muscle. And then once you have built a solid foundation, then you can go ahead and shred. But first, you need to be bulking. So I've told you the three core principles on how to go ahead and get an aesthetic physique. You need to be focusing on symmetry and balance, and you need to be focusing on just building as much muscle. And then in the future, by also delaying your gratification, not instantly going ahead and shredding down, but if you go ahead and stay consistent, you bulk, you build your muscle, you go ahead and build a foundation, then you can go ahead and shred down. And this will give you an aesthetic physique. But if you want a community with like-minded people who also want to go ahead and get aesthetic, get strong in the gym, be attractive, then you should go ahead and join my Skool community in the description, because I'll be making courses on how to go ahead and get aesthetic, how to go ahead and build an attractive physique, which will be attractive to women, and guys will also respect you more for building that sort of physique. So if you want a community with like-minded individuals, check out my Skool community. And if you've enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned for new videos to come.